Hello there and welcome to the RKphotographic video processing Lightroom session, a follow-up to the workshops at Patchings Art Festival 2013, an afternoon that you spent all morning, that you spent learning some camera skills and then learning some photo editing skills in Lightroom. Today we'll creating this as the follow-up video, just so you've got something to refer back to, and we'll go through the process again of editing a photograph and generating an output from Lightroom. And again, certainly feel free to drop us an email at learning@rkphotographic.com or give me a call on the number I've given you just to find out a bit more if you've got any questions. Okay, so as you notice, we're in Lightroom. We're in the library module, as I showed you. If you got your pictures on your memory card, you transfer them across once you've finished shooting across to your PC. Put them in a folder structure. I will suggest it's good to use a folder structure that certainly makes sense and then works for you. I personally use a date once. I have a year folder, a month folder, and then a sub date within that month. Some people use location, and other people, a little less arbitrary. So it's personal preference. Just use something that works for you. Okay, so once your images are on your PC, you'd boot Lightroom up, double click the icon off the desktop, then bring yourself into the library module and you would click on import. That brings up your list of your folder structure. You navigate to the appropriate folder structure, select that folder that has the pictures in that you want to import. It will only import ones that aren't in Lightroom already, so which is really good. Once you select the ones you want, they'll appear on this side, and you'll be able to select the ones specifically if you don't want to bring them all into Lightroom. I don't apply any editing at all at the pre-stage. I know you can do some. Lightroom does allow you to do some presets here. I don't do any of that at all in Lightroom. I find it at this stage, I find it's better to work on an image by image basis. It allows you to find your creativity and your vision and define the final output. The thing I do with my images here is I add keywords. So I will keyword all the images that I import together. So for example, if we brought a photo shoot of images taken at Whitby, perhaps at Whitby, North Yorkshire, sea, coast, seascape, landscape, my contact details, RKphotographic, www. Email address, etc, etc. Just things that it will apply to the metadata of the photo. Again, once they go online, it's certainly easier for anybody to track you if they want to actually use a photograph for commercial purposes. So it certainly increases your chances of actually getting paid and people following the lawful process to actually use your images. Anyway, once you've selected your images, put in your keywords, you literally just click on the import button at the bottom of the screen and that will bring all your images into Lightroom. We're not going to do any of that today because I've already got our images in. So I'm going to click cancel for now and go back to the images that you'll see. You'll remember these from the workshops. These were the ones that we're working on. So what we would do, we'll click on the image we want to edit. Today I'm going to use this excellent image that Pete Bridgewood, a friend and fellow photographer, has let us use. He's running a concept at the moment to kind of render my raw, so letting people apply their artistic vision to his photographs. He's really interested to see what the outcome is like, and certainly if you have a look on www.petebridgewood.com, that's his website, and go to the blog section, you'll find a blog all about his render my raw and different people's vision and interpretation of this very same image. And this is the whole process of being a photographer, having your vision in camera, shooting that image and also capturing that image and finishing it off in post-processing. Okay, so what we're going to do then now, we select the image we want, we will right click it, we'll create a virtual copy. This gives us a virtual copy of the image. So we are working on a fresh image, we're not working on the raw itself. I'll scroll up to the top of the screen. The only thing I really change on, apart from adding naming and titles in, the only thing I really actually change on this screen itself is the white balance. I will have a look at the white balance settings and see what they all do to the image in terms of its warmth and the look and feel of the image. You'll notice that we've got quite a number of white balance options here, from I shot auto, daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, and then custom, which you can set yourself. If you shot your image in RAW, you will see all these. If you shot in JPEG, you'll only see sort of 2-3 options. This is certainly another example of you having so much more flexibility if you actually shoot your image in RAW format. Okay, so we're going to have a look, see what auto does for it. Again, takes out a little bit of the blue cast because it was very early morning, long exposure, gives us some of the green back here, brings a bit of colour back up there. I also sometimes like to have a look down at the shade end, see how that affects a landscape photograph. Again, a little bit more warmth back into that one. So I think for this instance we will go with shade. You can do some basic editing in here. You know, there's no reason you can't, but certainly it's a non-destructive editor, so certainly have a play with Lightroom, see how you feel about it, and try, you know, and see how it works for you. It'll certainly create very different effects depending on what you click. Next we would do is move this slider on the right hand side down to the bottom, and we can just title our image before it's edited, before we actually export it later on. So we'll call this PBW 1. In fact, we'll call it 2 because we've already got a Pete Bridgewood 1. Well, it's copyrighted, creator Pete Bridgewood and Rob Knight, because Pete took the picture. I've done some editing. If I could remember exactly where the location was, we could put that in there as a sub-location. Again, if we went into the map module, that would reverse encode the GPS into it once we pinpointed it on a map. And what I tend to do in the label section further down here is just put a contact address in. So we're going to go for learning@rkphotographic.com. And that's the email address you certainly get in touch with me on. Okay, if you have a look along top here, just under the histogram, you'll notice that number one, you've got the histogram as you would see in camera. Again, you can see here Pete's shot fairly well, given us plenty of detail on the right hand side of the histogram, so there's plenty of raw data to play with. If you remember the discussion about kind of the last two zones of the histogram actually containing 60% of the available tonal values within the image, so we certainly want to make sure we've got plenty of data there, and we can happily, if we've got dark vision for this, we can certainly tone it back within Lightroom. Better to do that than do it in camera. Notice underneath it gives us our settings: ISO 50, that's the lowest native ISO of the Canon. So the 1DS Mark III and the 5D Mark II both go down to 50. I think the 5D Mark III does as well. Pete shot it on a 17 mils. If you look further down here, you can see he's actually shot it with a tilt shift 17mm lens. It's allowing him to get a very sharp image using the tilt and shift functionality and get the plane of the focus exactly where he wants it. Pete's also chosen an aperture of f/16. This, I would imagine, his choice of ISO being as low as it can would be to certainly reduce noise in the image, but also to give him a little bit longer exposure. And again, his aperture value of f/16, although he might be kind of just outside the sweet spot of the lens, Pete's probably used this in a creative manner to actually think about lengthening his exposure again. So we've got 25-second exposure. You got to see some lovely cloud movement up here, a lovely mirror light reflection in the water. And that's, you know, a consequence of the long exposure. So Pete here, as we can see, has taken control of his settings himself, and he's actually set them for creative effect. Okay, so then we move on to the develop module, and it moves all the way along the top. So we've got library, develop, map, book, slideshow, print, and web. We're only going to work in library, develop, and we'll have a quick look at map today just to see how it will work. So we literally work sequentially, and then once we're working within that module, we work our way down the panel on this side of the screen. So we're going to develop, brings our image up, And what I tend to do now is that although I would normally work down the panel on the right hand side, I normally scroll down all the way to the lens corrections section. It's nice if the computer has settings for the lens that it's actually used, you can actually click on there and it will actually correct the lens. Now the tilt shift lens, because it has so many variables in terms of you can actually tilt and shift and actually alter the plane and the focus completely, that there aren't actually any settings for this lens. So you rely on your own settings really to actually nail it, get your focus right, make sure you've got no vignetting on the corner, although you can add that later. We go to colour under lens corrections again, and one quick click on here, remove chromatic aberrations. Well, certainly if we've got any areas that are sort of high contrast lines to flat, well, sometimes you may see on an image has a little bit of colour detail in it. We can click it off again to look back at it, and if we look closely, can't actually see any chromatic aberration on Pete's image at all, but we can leave it ticked, it's not a problem. Zoom back out again on there. And if we were working with buildings, we could click the manual button and actually change the correction for converging verticals. It's very easy to do. So we've worked in our lens corrections. That's always the first thing I do. So we'll move back up the screen, and as we look across under the histogram, we've got a number of modules available to us here as the first creative choices. We've got our cropping straightening tool. This allows us to make creative crops, straighten the image, actually drag it in, actually make the image reflect our vision. It's as simple as a click. It puts a grid over your image. You can drag sides in quite easily. You can drag the bottom up, crop the image. As long as this little padlock here is unclicked, then it won't actually constrain anything. So if that was clicked and you moved in from the left hand side, it was also proportionately move the top in as well to maintain the aspect ratio. If we wanted to straighten the horizon on the image, we click on this little tool here. It says angle. It gives us a ruler. We click on, we'd look for our horizon, click on the left hand side, drag to the right. We'd normally go all the way across, and that would straighten it for us. Now Pete's done a very good job of straightening this image, so we're not actually going to apply that anyway. So we shall certainly undo the crop on there, undo the crop angle, and then again that's a good example of how easy it is in Lightroom to undo anything that you do. It's as simple as going to the edit and you can undo and redo. It's a very good tool, certainly for helping your creativity, but if you'd make a step too far, make an edit you're not happy with, it's so easy to undo it. Okay, we move across now. We've got the dust spot removal tool. Excellent tool. It's not, you could use it for other things as well as dust spots, so you could get rid of small details that are really kind of annoying or alarming. As we zoom in on Pete's picture here, look, you'll see, as a lot of photographers have, certainly as landscape photographers, we tend to have quite a few dust spots in our images. So it's as simple as get your size here. So we drag the size slider to the left. So we get the size of that little crosshair roughly where we want it, a little bit bigger, and we literally just click on the dust spots. As simple as this. And what it does is it samples from around the image and will actually replace the dust on our image with some clean pixels. It does a very good job most of the time as well. If we click off now, look, you'll see that most of them are actually gone. So we can move back over to this side of the screen. You'll notice there are a few more dust spots. So again, we go back to the dust spot tool, click on it, click on it, click on it, and again we click done. We've worked on this area of the screen, and we can drag it around when we're not selected quite easily. So that's certainly done a good job of getting rid of those dust spots we've got on the image at the moment. You sometimes find you've got more of a job on than other times. One thing to say, it's not a precise art changing the lens out in the landscape, and you pretty much guaranteed if you get out there and shoot plenty of images with your camera that you're going to get dust spots. There's no way around it. There's plenty of things you could do. There's a kind of the sensor cleaning kits you can buy. Sometimes make people a little bit nervous actually cleaning the sensor. Or there's plenty of places either online or sort of physical shops that will actually do a sensor clean for you. It's best, I would always say, it's best if you can go with a kind of manufacturer's authorised repair dealer. I think I've used a place in Stoke in the past called Layman's. Again, do an excellent job of a sensor clean. It's about £50, but certainly if I add up over the course of maybe 1,000 images, how many times I've had to dust spot my images to replace the marks, that £50 kind of starts to pale into insignificance a little bit when you think about all the work that you have to do to replace dust spots on your image. But again, it's personal preference, absolutely personal preference. Some people religiously have theirs done every sort of 6 months or so, just to make sure that they've got the best possible clean detail on the sensor. At the moment I think mine's due again, ready for a clean. Clearly Pete's is here, but it's no major hardship, and this is one of the great things that Lightroom does for us. It gives us the ability to actually recover some of these things where in camera might not be quite as we like. So we just scroll around the screen, having a check, making sure we've got no more dust spots. Whoops, I was about to say we got rid of all of them, but I think we've got one just there as well. Again, you can also do the same if you've got a kind of bird or a fly. Certainly I've been shooting up the Mantor in Derbyshire in the summer, and you can get kind of some really big flies flying around up there, and they kind of cross your vision of shooting, and you can quite easily pick one of those up on the image. And again, Lightroom will quite happily sample the pixels and do a brilliant job get rid of your dust spots. So we could really go down to the nth degree on this, and you can also do this in Photoshop with the brilliant content aware tool, and it's personal preference. Lightroom certainly has evolved an awful lot in terms of its dust spotting ability. Lightroom 5, which I'll be again doing the podcast on very shortly, has got an absolutely superb dust spotting tool in it. So don't be afraid to use it. Okay, right, the first thing I tend to do, because I wouldn't be doing any red eye removal tool, we have got a graduated tool, so it can apply any of these settings down here on a graduated version or a graduated process, so more to less. I tend to use that for creative purposes, or if I have gone out and I haven't got my grad filters with me. And again, as in Photoshop, you've got a brush tool, which is really good for doing bits of dodging and burning, painting with light into your image. What I tend to do first is I tend to just scroll down a little bit, and I will tend to now work on the image as globally before then doing some sort of little miniature and close-in adjustments. First thing I tend to do with an image once I've got it in is I have a look at the highlights, and I tend to drop them to the left, bring a little bit of detail back here in the sky, got a little bit more of the colour tones around the clouds, a little bit more detail, and I'll sometimes raise the shadows on now. This can look a little bit garish if you go mad, so it can look a little bit overcooked. So it's about striking a balance with any of the settings you use in Lightroom. Absolutely, you can overcook them, you can go as mad as you like, but try and strike a balance. I think the key and the aim as photographers when we process an image is to not make it look over processed. Most images, certainly raw files, do need some sharpening, some contrast, a little bit of exposure and colour, but we don't want to, if we can help it, over process the images. So we scroll down, and again we set the white and black points. Now this will help us with our contrast. And there's a really nifty little tool here that certainly on Windows or a Mac, if you hold the Alt key down and then click on the white slider, your screen will go black. Now if you start dragging this gently to the right until you just start to see a little bit of white deal. You don't want to create too much of a kind of a white, massive white spot in your picture. It's about 27 there. And again, the same with black. Set a black point, hold the Alt key down, move your slider, and this time we go to the left. And again, with the blacks, we can tend to push it a bit more until we start to see a little bit of detail here. And again, it's just about striking the nice balance. There we go. So that's given us a fairly nice contrast across the image. So a nice sort of contrast between our whitest whites and darkest darks in the image. It's already started giving it some nice depth, which is good. Then we scroll down a little bit further and we go into the presence setting. We apply clarity, vibrance and saturation. The clarity will help define edges, give our image a little bit more detail, and vibrance and saturation help us work with colour and just change the tones again of the image. Don't often do too much work with vibrance and saturation, probably more so with vibrance and saturation, but certainly clarity I tend to certainly add a little bit, especially to raw files. So again, as all the sliders work in Lightroom, dragging to the left gives you less, to the right more. So we just move the slider to the right, and again it's all about thinking about very sensitive adjustments, and we keep an eye on the image as we do it just to see what effect it's having. And again, you'll notice if you look at your histogram, you'll notice all your edits have a direct effect on your histogram as well. So we can drop it all the way back down again to 0, and we can just keep it moving, keep the detail in. I think where we were about 31, let's just put a little bit of detail in there. A little bit in here, although it's dark in this area very slightly, which we can certainly fix with the brush tool shortly. We might want to add a little bit of colour tone vibrance to the overall image, just to, there we go, again not too much, just to warm it up a little bit. I mean, you could go in the opposite direction. If you want to quite reduce palette, you drag it to the left, you can reduce your colour tones almost all the way back to a black and white image. I think it's personal preference. So as we're going to work for colour at the moment, I'm just going to drag it very slightly to the right, probably about 3 or 4 maybe. Again, just having a look at the visual preview it gives you on screen and seeing what we think. Shan't be playing with the saturation, quite happy with the saturation it is on the image. Again, if we wanted to work with a contrast, a tone curve is an excellent way of doing that, and it's really targeted in terms of the contrast and quite minute contrasts. And it's quite a simple one in terms of contrast. There are some presets that you can put in. You can dial your sliders for your highlights, your lights, your darks and your shadows, so they affect the image in specific colour tone and light tone value areas. But what we're going to do, and as a general rule with photography, with most photos, certainly landscapes, if you work with your actually curve itself and click on sort of the upper quadrant here, just drag it up a little bit. Let's try again. So we click and drag up, raise that line up a bit. Let's just lift in our highlights a little bit, and then we come down to the other end. And we click on the lower quadrant here. We just drag it down a little bit again. Creates a nice inverted S. So again, we've got a really nice contrast between the lights and the darks, and there's a really nice depth into the image now. You can almost walk through the image. It's almost giving it kind of a 3D effect. Certainly the rocks in the pool are really giving it a bit of pop. The water's got that lovely glass effect. If we decide we want to paint a bit of light in here and around the lighthouse, we can certainly do that quite easily. So now we scroll down, move down the image, and we can actually work on specific colours within the image. Here we can work on the hues of the image, so that's affecting sort of the tones specifically of the reds, the oranges and the blues, and how they affect and how they actually display to us. We can work with the saturation of the colours, so how definite, how rich the colours are, and we can work with the luminance, and that's actually how the light affects the colour. So as well as actually using the sliders to actually affect specific colours in the image, what we can also do, which is an excellent tool. If we click on this tool here, this works in all these sections, but I'm going to certainly work on it in the luminance section here. We click on this tool here, which is the targeted adjustment tool. We hover over the image, it shows us that that icon, and a simple left click and hold down, and then what we do now is we move it up, move the mouse up. That will actually increase the effect. Move it down, it'll decrease the effect. If you have a look on the right hand side on the HSL color black and white box again, you'll see that now I'm holding my mouse over the image. Although we're on a greeny yellow area of the image, it actually shows us that as a box, which is actually greyed out, showing us that we're actually in a yellow zone. I'll show you how it works. If we come down gently down, so we go down. So we can raise the vibrance of the colours if we want to and the effect of the light, or we can come the opposite way and really drop the tone of the colours. I quite like them having a little bit more punch, just to try and reflect the colour that we've got in the sky here. So I think once we've painted a little bit of light into there as well, it will have a nice balance to the image. Again, it's good to actually work out how far to go and how far not to go. So we're going to keep it quite minimal, the edit on here. Move down to the next panel, and the split toning panel is really good for working with black and white images, or if you're working with a colour image you can apply it for creativity. But that allows us to put a colour into the highlight and a colour into the shadows and give it a very definitive and different look. I tend to use that in black and white images more so. It's quite a trend for wedding photographers to use it to give their image quite a stylised effect. But same for landscapes. I'm not going to use that at all today. We move down again. We're into the detail section. This is where we can apply our sharpening. That's to really bring out details and edges and the micro contrast within our image. We've got two options here. We can actually zoom in on a part of the image just by clicking on it, or we can actually view the image as a whole. But if we select this crosshair here, adjust detail zoom area, we could click an area that has some nice contrast, some nice light, some lines and some colour, and actually see. So we could click on that locks that into there, and now we can actually see what our sharpening has as an effect across the image. One thing I do tend to change is the radius and drop it down by half, down to 0.5. There's personal preference, but I just find it's a little bit more subtle in terms of its sharpening. Most images, certainly RAWs, need some sharpening. This is raw sharpening. What we'll do now is we'll drag this slider to right. It's a case of looking at your image, working out what your output's going to be, and actually deciding what is right for you as an individual. You will know when you've gone too far, because if you sharpen too far, you'll start to see kind of noise and granular effect around your pixels. So I tend to click on the slider and we'll drag the sharpening to the right, certainly keeping an eye on the main screen itself and on our little target box. Most images will take sort of 70-ish. Some will take a lot more. You'll notice there, if we go too high, up to 150, there's some little dots start to appear in this targeted area. So I tend to work maybe at the 70s, 75, 77 seems quite nice. And again, if we look here at the image itself, it's started to really define the details here. Now, what we've done at the moment is we've applied the image sharpening to the whole image uniformly. Now, what it has done is it's highlighted that we've got some more dust spots. So what we can do very quickly, go up to our dust spot tool and remove that tool, really, and remove that dust spot quite simply. We could make this a little bit bigger, just to make sure that we've not got any edge there. Yep, I'm happy with that. So we've got rid of that dust spot. Now, thinking about the sharpening again, we're at 77. We've set the radius down to 0.5. Detail itself, I tend to leave that at kind of 25. I'm quite happy with how Lightroom works on that. But one really good tool within Lightroom is the masking tool. Now this, as I say, when we sharpen an image, what we do is we apply sharpening to the whole image uniformly. Now we know by looking at skies, by looking at sea, that actually, in reality, that actually they're quite smooth objects, and certainly with a long exposure here, you want your sky to have that smooth, that flow, and your waters to be really smooth, but the detail, the rocks and things to pop out of it. Using the masking tool, we can actually apply our sharpening selectively to parts of the image. And how it works is you press your Alt key again, click on the masking slider, it sends the whole image white. White means that our sharpening is applying to the whole image. So we drag it to the right until we see areas of black. Black areas are areas that aren't being sharpened. Now what I want in this is I don't want the sky sharpened, and I want to lose the sharpening on the water. We could have a little bit of sharpening of those clouds that are wisping through the sky, just to really make them stand out. And you can take this as far and as little as you like. Now if we look at the image now, we've got sharpening on the rocks, in the midground, around the kind of the horizon. We've got sharpening on the lighthouse itself, and a little bit of sharpening actually in the clouds. Quite happy with that. The black areas, there's no sharpening applied at all, so we'll have a lovely smooth effect to the water and a smooth effect to the sky, which is pretty much what we're going for in this image. So we let go of the clicker, and we let go of the Alt key. That applies the sharpening, and we can zoom in on the image now and actually see how the sharpening is applied. So here it's created some really nice definitive lines around the lighthouse, around the rocks. It's added some depth into the image, but it's not applied the sharpening to the water or the sky, so it's keeping that nice and smooth for us. So we then scroll down, and the next box which we work with in Lightroom, we can look at noise reduction. Excellent little tool again. Now the good thing about Pete's images is although it's on a long exposure, there's not generated too much noise in it. He shot it at a very low native ISO, so again it shouldn't generate too much noise. But if you have got some noise, you can use your sliders again to reduce noise reduction in terms of luminance, so sparkles, a bit of degradation in pixels, or you can actually use your colour noise reduction to actually reduce where you've got kind of specific red, green, blue noise pixels that appear in very noisy images. You'll see that if you raise your shadows up on an image that was shot at a fairly mid ISO in a very dark area, that you'll start to see noise. So Lightroom can certainly do a certain amount, and it's maybe not quite as powerful as the Nik sharpening tool Define 2.0, but it does a very good job, and certainly the sharpening in Lightroom 5 and the noise reduction in Lightroom 5 is excellent as well. So we scroll down again. The final thing we to apply now is to look at actually applying some post-crop vignetting. So do we want to actually darken the image? Now the first thing we need to think about really is, are we going to go with this crop? Now, I think what we'll do with the image is I'll actually take quite a narrow crop. So I'm going to go for a 16 by 9 crop on this. I think I do like the foreground, so I'm going to keep the rocks in, lose a little bit of the sky at the top, so double click after we've selected that. That's narrowed the image, made it a lot more letterbox. Quite happy with that. And we could apply a vignette to darken the corners and focus the eyes in. What I'm going to do first, mind you, is I'm actually going to click on the brush tool, and what we can do now is we can actually work to maybe paint a little bit of light into this area here which was darkened. So we just drop our brush down a little bit, so we've got a reasonably small brush. That's big enough, yeah. We keep the feather at 100%. Flow tends to be about 70. That's almost kind of like its opacity. Feather is how definite the actual flow of the actual effect of the tool is, and the difference between where it's not affected and where it has. So what we'll do now is we'll paint on the area that we want to certainly brighten up, and we've not actually set any settings yet. All we're doing is painting the area that we know we want to brighten. A little bit around the bottom there. We could zoom in quite easily. Now we've painted a mask onto there. What we can do now is use the slider tool and just raise a little bit of light into the area we've painted on. So again, we slide this to the right, just bring a little bit of light back into that area. Again, you've got to think about keeping it relatively natural, relatively sensible, so it doesn't look too dark, doesn't look too contrasty. So it's getting the balance just about right. I think I quite like that. We've just opened up a little bit of the shadows. You can see a bit further down on there. So we can click done. What I tend to do now is I'll zoom in on the image and I have a look at how it's actually affected in quite a micro scale. You'll see it's picked out the detail in the hills, it's picked out the mist, you can really see the steps going up, and it's picked out a little bit more detail in the mid distance. So that's done a good job. It's quite a sensitive, gentle little bit of editing there just to bring a little bit of colour into the image. What we could also do, I mean, I'd imagine the morning of being there, if you've been there for a sunrise, you'll know there's sometimes a lot more colour in the sky than you actually see. So we could actually use another brush tool again. So we select brush again, and we could look and raise the size of the brush a little bit here. And what we could do is think about painting a little bit of colour here into the sky. So in this case, what I will probably do is just select the colour tint before I do the painting, because then we can easily see what it's affecting. So we want to just warm this area up a bit to really accentuate that sunrise. So we slide the temperature a little bit to the right. So increase the yellows, slide the tint to the right a bit, increase the magentas as well. So we're again doing it quite sensibly, and then we can just paint on the image, gently onto the image, just to add that effect, just to that area really where the sun's coming in. We don't want it to kind of look too garish. We could paint a little bit on there, and again, just to make it look stormy, we could paint a little bit into the sky. Again, it's keeping a nice balance, and if we decide we've actually got a little bit too much on that, we can easily drop the sliders again off to the left, and balance that setting. I think I'm pretty pleased with that setting, how it's looking at the image at the moment, how it's just had that little bit of warmth to the image. We might think, do we want to put a little bit into the pool as well? So we've got a little bit on the reflection, and we could kind of follow the lines of the cloud. So we could again use the same brush, and we could just kind of paint a little bit of colour into that pool. Just add a little bit of light onto it. It's just accentuating the light that's actually in the scene. Once we're happy with that, we click done, scroll down. The final piece of the image, as much as we mentioned before, is just to focus the eye in on the scene. I'm just going to add a little bit of vignetting, drag the slider to the left hand side just to darken the corners very slightly, focus the eyes through the scene. There we go, make the lighthouse the real kind of star of the image. So we just get the settings to exactly where we want them. Yeah, I think we're happy with that, that's good. And once we've completed all our editing, the simple thing we do now is we just export this, and this will be the first time that we actually create a JPEG from the raw file. We've got the raw file we can return to, we can edit it, re-edit it, create black and white, create different visions from the same image. It's simple as File, Export. You can set a folder where your images export to, so these are going to a specific folder or going somewhere where we've defined already. We change the file name, so click on Edit. We've already kind of encoded it into the EXIF data, so we'll call it PBW2. We click Done. Then we scroll down and just complete the final bits. We keep the format as it is at the moment, keep the quality high. If it was for web, we could drop it down to about 70. If we might be printing, we'll just keep this about 100. Scroll down. If you were resizing your images for a camera club competition night, you could resize a specific edge and keep the proportions the same. So we're happy at that. Resolution, if you're doing this for web, you can drop your images down to about 72. Certainly for print, I'll tend to work at 240 or 300, so we'll put 300 in there. We apply a little bit of output sharpening, so Lightroom has some reasonably good sharpening for output. It's not going to give us lots of settings like the Nik software sharpening tool does, but it gives us some very good settings for screen, matte paper and glossy paper, and then the amount of sharpening. I'm going to sharpen this for screen. I could create another one if I wanted to for paper, and they all require different amounts of sharpening. We scroll down and we click export. Once the file's exported, we'll be happy with it, and it'll have created that digital file within a folder for us. And there we go, there's our file. That appears now as an actual JPEG output for us, and now we've got a file that we've actually created from the raw negative.